Hi, my name's Ganesh Taylor, and I'm your host for AI and the End of Humanity. From sophisticated robots to the development of new drugs, artificial intelligence, or AI, is shaping our future in many sectors. Once we thought the creation of original text and forms of art were the select preserve of human beings. But the exponential development of AI is challenging these assumptions. An increasing number claim that AI threatens the very idea of what it is to be human. A recent survey of more than 900 technology pioneers and policy leaders predicted that AI would threaten human autonomy and agency, with over a third saying we would be worse off in the future. Confirmed, they argue, by Musk's proposal that we should link our brains directly to machines. So, should we see AI as opening up an era of groundbreaking innovation, or does it foreshadow the loss of vital human attributes and independence? Or does AI fundamentally challenge and change what it means to be human? Or is all of this talk of its radical importance a sign that we've actually just been taken in by the marketing hype of an enormously profitable industry, and humans not only remain very much in control, but will continue to do so going forward? We're joined by four fantastic speakers. Eliezer Yudkowsky is a leading AI safety researcher who focuses on superintelligence and runaway AI. He has called for a stop in AI development to avoid catastrophe. Scott Aronson is one of the top quantum complexity theorists in the world, renowned for his research in quantum computing. Scott is now working for OpenAI on the theoretical foundations of AI safety. Liv Boeri is one of the most successful poker players of all time. Since retiring from poker, Liv is now a leading figure in the effective altruist movement. She too has warned of the severe consequences of runaway AI. And last but by no means least, we have Joscha Bach, who is a cognitive scientist who is pushing the limits of what we can achieve with AI. Renowned for his philosophical insight, Joscha's research delves into the similarities and differences between the human mind and artificially intelligent systems. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Eliezer, if you'd like to take it away, 2 minutes on the question of whether or not AI fundamentally challenges what it means to be human.
I have no idea what it could mean for something to fundamentally challenge what it means to be human. The meaning that we bring to humanity is something that we bring ourselves. What things outside of ourselves should not be able to change it very much. Could AI change who we are? Well, if we knew how to shape AI, if we knew how to get nice things out of AI, if we could get magic cornucopias out of AI, and if we knew enough, we probably could do that. When we could change who we are, that would change what it means to be us. This seems hard. I think the actual challenge, and it's not a very fundamental one, that AI poses to us today is, how do we back off? We are not ready. This looks to be a thorny thing that is difficult to get exactly right, and it's at a power level where if we don't get it right, it just smashes everything. Our institutions are nowhere near capable of handling this. It's not that there's a near miss in progress. This is, they're just not even coming close to what they need to do to get things under control. So I think we are faced with a unprecedented world level challenge of don't have anyone anywhere do this.
That was very clear. Scott, what's your position on this? I mean,
Yeah, so I also don't know what it means to change what it means to be human, but I think that absolutely AI could challenge our sense of uniqueness as humans, as the only beings in town who can understand, mean things. I think to some extent that has already happened, right? We are, as of a few years ago, no longer the only entities on Earth that can that can have a detailed conversation about a given topic with at least the semblance of understanding that topic. We now have LLMs that can do that. And we can still see differences. We can still see things that we can do that GPT-4, for example, cannot. It can't yet write my research papers for me, or nor can it change a light bulb, or all kinds of manipulations of the physical world. But I think that we are now confronted with a question that generations of science fiction writers grappled with before us, of well, what happens when we get AIs that can do just about anything that we do as well or better than we do it? Sort of what does it mean to be human in that kind of world? I think that starts to change, not merely kind of what advice do we give kids about, what careers to have, but what is even the point of life at all? It then feels, less like, producing something that only you could have produced, and more like, finding specialness, and just the fact that, maybe, well, even though an AI could have done something better, it wouldn't have done it exactly the same way as you. This is your poem or your music, or something like that, or just sitting back and enjoying life, which probably is already the goal for a very large fraction of people, and maybe the small fraction for whom it isn't should just get over themselves.
Fantastic. Liv, I mean, where are you at on this question of AI challenging what it means to be human?
So yes, I do think AI will challenge what it means to be human, because what it means to be human has never been fixed. It's always been changing as our technology and environment changes over time. And that's fine. I mean, there's no guarantee that this change will be good for us. I think we can all agree social media has created a bunch of undesirable outcomes, like making us more narcissistic, more tribal, and just decimating people's attention spans. And the thing is, it's not like Zuckerberg and co wanted to do all of these bad things. It's just that it so happened that market forces best rewarded the platforms that designed their algorithms this way. And frankly, I think it's anyone who thinks it's sufficient to entirely rely on markets for product safety is a naive idealist. Markets don't directly select for human well-being. They select for products that appear sufficiently good for human well-being such that they can be sold. And so if you can find a way to quietly externalize your costs, then that's even better. And so the result of this subtle difference is that we end up with a bunch of tragedies of the commons, and in some cases, even direct deceptions, like when tobacco companies pretended for decades that cigarettes don't cause cancer, or when Volkswagen cheated on emissions tests, or more recently, when 3M got their 10 billion fine last year for leaking PFAs into the water supply. They leaked these when they knew that these forever chemicals are likely to be carcinogenic. But again, market forces motivated them to keep on using these chemicals anyway, as long as they could get away with it. So sadly, history has been littered with psychopathic corporate behavior like this. And it doesn't seem optimal, to me at least, to have the same mechanism that allows for or even encourages these behaviors to be the sole driver of advanced AI. But that is our current trajectory right now. And AI, and especially AGI, is said to be a bigger paradigm shift than the agricultural or industrial revolutions. So we need to treat this change to humanity with the care and wisdom it deserves, and prioritize getting this change right, rather than just doing it as fast as possible.
Fascinating. Okay, Joscha, your 2 minutes, please.
I think that to be human means to challenge what it is to be human, right? It's a difficult question what it even is. We have some kind of wind that emerges in the activation patterns of neurons that talk to each other. And in a way, AI gives us new perspectives on how to deal with this condition. And I agree with the other speakers that AI is a technology that changes the way in which we are interacting with ourselves and with each other, and how we look at ourselves, of course. I think that without technology, we would not be able to feed the populations that we currently have. The markets that sometimes produce bad incentives are also the only thing that is currently has enough productivity to feed the people that are on the planet. If we abolish these systems and replace it by anything else that has been tried so far, we would dramatically have to reduce the number of people on the planet, or that it would reduce itself, because without, for instance, the chemical industry, we wouldn't have nitrogen binding, and without nitrogen binding, we cannot produce a lot of food. And when we are currently on a trajectory where we basically need better technological solutions to understand how to interact with ourselves and with the planet to stay on this planet. And without AI, I suspect we will be in a dire spot. AI is not solving all our problems, but it's throwing many of the balls up into the air and increases our chances of survival at the moment. I also don't think that social media are bad in the sense. We are a society that is very confused, or a civilization that is confused and incoherent. And social media allows us to become more coherent. And the first step is that it allows us to see how incoherent we are. Right before that, we only had to rely on media to tell us about reality. And now we realize that we cannot trust media. We knew this before, but we had no other ways of becoming coherent. And this is a process that takes time. We're still in the early days of these developments. And I think AI is an important building block of making us more coherent.
Okay, there's a lot of food for thought there. I think it might be quite helpful for us to sort of start relatively basic, let's say. So I've heard LLMs, IGM, various letters in combination. So let's just start by acknowledging the fact that this thing that we call artificial intelligence has a long history of being developed, and that we are now in this sort of Renaissance era where the systems that have been being built by human beings are becoming recognizably more intelligent. Is that a fair starting point, let's say? You can all just nod or disagree or whatever. Yeah, is that about fair? Perfect.
Great.
Okay, so I guess the salient point here is, it seems that what we now call AI and recognize as AI has gone over some sort of threshold where we start to recognize sort of human characteristics or proto-human characteristics within what these systems are doing. And so I guess the question is, will AI systems continue to develop in that sort of trajectory and become more recognizably carrying of human characteristics, maybe even of understanding, and then ultimately emotions? And I think it's the consciousness part of it that really gets people, sort of gives them the heebie-jeebies. So Scott, I wondered if you could sort of talk to that a little bit, this idea of, AI is developing, it's growing, it's getting better and bigger and more recognizably human. And is it actually possible for it to develop understanding or emotions, or is it possible to do any of those things even?
Well, first of all, I would say that the large language models that we have today, they already give verbal responses that if a human had given them to you, right, you would have said, yes, there is emotion there, there is understanding there. I think that, you would have ascribed all of those things to it. So, in other words, I would claim that we already have, as of a few years ago, AIs that pass some version of the Turing test. It depends, always on who is the judge and what kind of topic are they allowed to ask about and so forth. But, I think that in normal conversation, these things, they're not only do they pick up on emotional nuances, but, because of the way they were trained, they often do that better than humans do. Right. And ironically, this is something that almost no one would have predicted 10 or 20 years ago, but they are in many ways better at emotional nuance than they are at logical reasoning, or at things that you would have thought were the strength of an AI. So it's clear that these systems are going to continue to improve. There is the main way that they've improved as much as they have has not been any radical new idea that we didn't know, in the 80s or the 90s, right? Incredibly, it has mostly been scale. Right. It has been, building models that have many billions of parameters or trillions, and then training those models on, a large fraction of all the data on the internet. That is what has given them either, intelligence, the semblance of intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And there is a clear path forward to just keep building bigger models and training them on more data. Now, we don't know how far this will continue. For one thing, as we scale the models, we're going to run at some point into energy constraints. The fraction of energy that you'll need will be a large fraction of all the energy that's produced on Earth. That's why, Microsoft is investing in nuclear plants now, for example, right? There's also a question of, where will we find more training data, right? I mean, we're already using most of the text on the internet. There's all of TikTok and Instagram that could still be fed into the model, but that might just make the models dumber rather than smarter, right? So it's not clear whether this will asymptote or at some point, or whether it will reach human level. And of course, human level is not at all a natural terminus here, right? You could also go beyond human intelligence, beyond human emotional understanding. You could imagine that. But it's not clear whether that's going to happen with existing technology, with the existing approach. Even if it doesn't, of course, it's entirely possible that someone will come up with a new approach that will get around the limitations of this one. And then finally, you asked about consciousness. So that's the hard metaphysical question, because for 2,000 years, no one has known how to reduce that question to anything empirical, right? You could have a model that is interacting, perfectly, like any human that you would name. No one can tell the difference. And someone might come along and say, well, okay, but because it's made of silicon and it's not made of meat, we know that it's just a bunch of ones and zeros. It doesn't really understand anything, right? And of course, there's an obvious rejoinder that those critics almost never want to grapple with, which, well, how do we know that you really understand anything? I mean, you're just a bundle of neurons and synapses, right? But now you get into a philosophical problem that I think some of the greatest minds have argued about for thousands of years. We're probably not going to resolve it in this conversation. But I think can you have AIs that would at least produce the external behavior that in humans we would associate with consciousness? To some extent, not only is that possible, but to some extent we already have that, I would say.
I mean, does anyone disagree with that?
All right, so the current set of systems are being trained to predict what humans will say and do individually. Not just what humans on average do, but what any individual string of text on the internet will say next. They aren't being trained to imitate an average human. They are being trained to predict individual humans. Suppose that you find the finest actress you can, set her to watch a tavern for months at a time until she can predict what every single person in that tavern is like individually as they get drunk, and convincingly put on individual performances for what each of the people in the tavern are like when they are drunk. Is she drunk herself? Probably not, because to predict a drunk person, it doesn't actually help to be drunk yourself, to forget for yourself, to get disinhibited yourself, to put on a really perfect individual performance, match the individual. You want to be at your top performance for that. You don't want to be drunk. The current AIs are being trained to predict what humans talk about, including what happens when humans talk about consciousness. If you wanted to find out whether they were spontaneously expressing a sense of their own existence, you would strip all the talk of self-awareness and consciousness out of the data set they were being trained to predict, and then see whether they talk like that. As far as I know, nobody's even expressed any interest in running this experiment because it's not going to make money.
Right.
Imitating emotion.
I've heard many people express interest, but they haven't.
Why aren't they doing it?
Doesn't mean they've done it.
Cool. All right. They've expressed interest, but they have no corporate ability to actually run the experiment because it's not going to make money. Putting on convincing performances of emotion sounds like something that could make a lot of money. You have the image, the video of this human-shaped figure who seems to really be interested in you and maybe even be in love with you. That sounds very profitable. So there's also a certain amount of profit motive in continuing to maintain your current state of having no idea what goes on inside the system. Just vast football, like hundreds of thousands of football fields size spreadsheets of inscrutable floating point numbers. And as long as you, the company, don't know what they mean, you can tell people, well, for all we know, the AI really loves you. But keep in mind that what the AI has actually been trained to do is predict exactly what individuals will say next, including when they're talking about loving their partners.
I mean, I would like to add that, I mean, further to that, we as you say, we haven't, there doesn't seem to be anywhere near the sufficient amount of effort or resources put into coming up with good tests of consciousness. Like, one of the best ones I've seen thus far was just by a guy on Twitter. This guy, Josh Witten, did a thread where he did like the mirror test with a bunch of different LLMs. And you come away from it and it's like, I don't know, if after reading that, I slightly update in the direction, I mean, it's only very slightly, again, my error bars are enormous, slightly direct update in the direction of them being consciousness. But the point is like, in either we end up under ascribing consciousness to something that actually has developed it, or we end up giving something like falsely ascribing consciousness to something that absolutely doesn't deserve it, and thus giving it a bunch of resources and rights and so on that will come away from humans, at least in the beginning. Both of those could be enormous moral catastrophes. But no one seems to care. They're just like, let's go as fast as possible. Who cares? La, 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 la. Like, I would like to just see some fraction, like, I mean, I'm sure the fraction is greater than 0 that is being put into coming up with some consciousness tests, but it's certainly not more than 1% in terms of resources. I'm sure, Scott, you can talk to this more, but like, to me, like deserving of 20, 30, something at least %. So, yeah.
It's vastly beyond their present abilities. They can't peer into the systems. They don't know how they work. How are they supposed to test it?
Right. I guess a test for consciousness is the kind of thing where how would you even know if you had succeeded? Right.
Well, the saying goes that basically a robot needs to be able to recognize themselves in the mirror and hate what they see. Then they will be fully human. But I think that we need to address this question of how to make sense of machine consciousness in earnest. And what I'm currently proposing is that we build an institute for this purpose. It's a non-profit. We probably should do it in San Francisco because everywhere else it would be just an art project. And start an initiative across companies, academia, and the arts to deal with this question in earnest. And
how will you tell? How will you tell whether you've succeeded?
We'll find this out in this, but in a narrow sense, my hypothesis is that consciousness is, when we point at it, indexically, 2 things. It's a second order perception. You notice that you're noticing. And that might be an artifact of consciousness being a self-organizing process. So it needs to have some kind of control mechanism that establishes its own nature and keeps it stable. And the other one is that consciousness creates now and happens now. It creates this bubble of nowness that we subjectively inhabit. And so based on these observations, I suspect that it's something like a consensus algorithm that basically makes all our models coherent. And this bubble of coherence that it creates and that we observe is what we experience is happening right now. And this self-perception is part of this bubble. And that's why it's present, this reflexive nature of consciousness within this bubble. And so when we ask the question, is a cat conscious? This question for me comes down to the question, is the cat aware of the fact that it's aware? So basically, is the behavior of the cat, its external and internal behavior of the cat driven causally by the representation of that awareness of the cat, of its self-awareness? And subjectively, I have the impression that it is, because I can also vibe with the cat. I basically can go into a state where we have perceptual empathy, and the cat and me have basically built feedback loops to each other and notice that the other one is noticing aspects of the mental state of the cat. Now, that is something that the LLM cannot do because it's not perceptually coupled to the environment. To me, perceptual coupling of such system is a very interesting question. I also think that if we want to do such research, it makes a lot of sense to do this up to cat level. And because if we are building systems that are at the human level, it's very difficult to take responsibility for their actions. Presumably, if we go vastly superhuman level at the civilization level and so on, the bots are again up in the air, and it's very difficult to make that discussion again. But I think at a human level already, we are in a situation where it's difficult to take ethical responsibility.
To go back to what Scott said at the beginning, so I found it really interesting that you said that effectively through the creation of the internet, it was possible to effectively generate a data set so vastly large that previous artificial intelligence sort of approaches were able to actually reach this level of something that we can sort of at least partially recognize as being a mimic of some kind of human behaviors, right? And Eliezer, you were saying that it is just that, it is a mimic, it is a personalized mimic to a prediction, sorry, you were saying, right? A prediction of what's going to happen next.
I'm saying that's how it's trained.
Right.
What mechanisms perform the prediction, what actually goes on inside, and what it's like to be a large language model are something into which we have no vision.
Right.
Our glasses are blinded.
Right.
So we understand the externals. That doesn't mean we understand the internals.
Right. Okay. So what we're seeing is something that resembles a sort of predictive mimicry of what we're expecting, but we don't actually understand where this thing is coming from. And to link back to what you were just saying, Joscha, I found myself thinking, so the question was, will it develop all of these kinds of characteristics, right? We're trying to make a prediction here about how we think these things are going to go. And I found myself thinking, perhaps because of my own background in developmental biology, but you know, human beings don't start off as particularly conscious, I don't think, right? I mean, I'm no child psychologist, but there's a sort of developmental trajectory to human consciousness as we recognize it even. And so I'm curious, as we sort of wrap this theme up, whether or not we think that it's almost an unfair question to ask. Like, you wouldn't ask a 2-year-old, is it conscious? Or maybe a 1-year-old or something like that. And perhaps these AIs are sort of at that level. And so then we get back to the same question again, which is, well, do we think it's actually possible for this thing? Let's say we overcome the barrier of physical energy. Let's say we overcome the barrier of how much silicon we have on planet Earth. Say we feed it every single piece of information from every single human being on Earth. How far can this thing actually go?
I suspect that's a misunderstanding. Of course, a 2-year-old doesn't have a lot of metacognition, so it's difficult for a 2-year-old to conceptualize the fact that it is conscious. But I don't think that we become conscious after the PhD. We become conscious before we can track a finger. And we observe that those humans which do not become conscious remain vegetables. It's the prerequisite for learning and organizing the brain. And so I suspect because everybody becomes conscious in order to achieve the performance that you observe in humans, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of alternative in any kind of animal that we see that is complex, that consciousness itself is relatively simple, and it's a learning algorithm. It's the simplest learning algorithm that nature has discovered to train a self-organizing brain. So, of course, there's not a self at this point, but the self is not a prerequisite for consciousness. The self is a content that consciousness creates to model the person that interacts with the world.
There are people who believe that there is something special about the biological substrate that we are running on that, you know, allows us to have first-person experience, and that would not allow an AI to have something analogous to that, no matter how impressive its behavior was. Now, I don't know how to prove those people wrong, but I would also say that the burden is on them to articulate, you know, what is special about, you know, the wetware, as it's called, about the, you know, biological hardware that we are running on. But, you know, but that question now, you know, is no longer the domain of just, you know, philosophy and science fiction. Right. Mm-hmm. If you ask me, like you know, the only thing that I can see that really fundamentally distinguishes, you know, our brains as we currently understand them from any digital computer is that, you know, digital computer programs are copyable, they're backupable. We have perfect visibility into, you know, what every bit is doing at every time step. And, you know, with our brains, we just don't have that. You know, we don't know if there's a fundamental physical limitation to learning the exact state of someone's brain. But, you know, I think if you wanted to say that there was something about a brain that couldn't be replicated in silica, and even in principle that you would have to attach great importance to those things. I think that
And I
that's
would like
what
to
we're forced to.
point out there is like one consistent theme throughout our history of dealing with consciousness is that we have a very large tendency to undescribe consciousness to other beings. We did it to other types of humans long ago. Then it took us a long time to give, or at least whether it's consciousness or like moral personhood. We wouldn't give it to other humans. We wouldn't give it to, we thought animals had zero ability to suffer, or like even when we figured out they could suffer, we still didn't think it mattered, etc. And over time, we always lag behind. And so we should bear that in mind in our.
That was precisely Turing's argument, 75 years ago.
And yet we're still relying on his like napkin side note. Like that's the one thing we've got, the Turing test.
On a political level, suppose that a senior-looking scientist comes and says, I have a theory of consciousness. I understand consciousness. It's not the consensus of philosophers, of course, but I understand it. Consciousness requires higher-order reflection. You need to be able to model yourself, and you need to be able to model yourself modeling yourself. And when you talk to a human 2-year-old, you can tell that they sure don't have second-order reflection going on. In fact, if you look at like how their brain develops and they start going on brain, like this thing is developed, that thing developed. Therefore, says the scientist, I am very confident that human 2-year-olds have no qualia, and it's okay to eat them. I think that a voter is incredibly valid if they say, maybe you're right, but how can I trust you? And therefore, it's going to remain illegal to eat 2-year-olds. What about large language models? Why believe the guys at the AI company any more than you're believing the scientists?
Well, what if the law becomes you're allowed to delete a large language model as long as you keep a backup copy somewhere else?
Would you apply that policy to 2-year-olds?
Well, how do you make a backup copy of the 2-year-old? If you could, then maybe. I mean, this gets into the old chestnuts about would you agree to use the teleportation machine that works by just destroying the original copy and so forth.
But the question of whether we eat an animal doesn't hinge on whether they have qualia or not. They quite clearly have qualia. There are other considerations that come into play. It's a kind of complicated question, which rights are being given to which system under which circumstances. But there's another issue I would like to point at. The ontological status of consciousness is not a physical object. It's not a thing that we can put into a petri dish or under a microscope or measure in this way, because it's a simulated property. It exists as if it exists virtually. When we look into the brain, we just see activation patterns, and it must be something in these patterns. It's a pattern with causal power. And if you think about this fact that the person that we are is not real, a point that meditators and philosophers have pointed to across cultures for as long as we have history about this, that the self is a construct, that it's a story that the mind tells itself, and our consciousness itself can be deconstructed because it is a representation. Once we take this into account, the question of whether the simulation that an LLM makes of a consciousness is more simulated than the one that our brain makes becomes quite hairy. It's still an interesting question that has answers that are meaningful, and I don't think that the LLM is conscious in the same way as we are. But if consciousness is a simulation and so on, the question is at which point does the simulation and the machine become functionally equivalent in the ways in which they matter to us?
Also, why does that matter? Sorry, this is the thing I'm not getting here. So, in terms of the answer to the question, will they be able to develop all of these things and will they become conscious? We've gotten stuck on the how do you prove it? But let's say they do, right? So what? Like, what is the concern here that people have with this idea of AI developing, abilities to have consciousness? And what is it? Just a fear of losing control of something that we've created?
Well, you can lose control of something that doesn't have your own style of consciousness, but if it does have your style of consciousness, it can hurt, and then you ought to not hurt it. And if you say, well, I don't care because it's no skin off my back, then I'm like, I care because it's a fellow sentient being, and perhaps we just have a political conflict there. But mostly I suspect that you're not really integrating what it would mean for there to be somebody inside a computer who is hurting. Yeah. Maybe, like if you found out that you were somebody like that, would it suddenly be okay to you for other people to hurt you?
I do think that it's crucial to separate the two questions of one, what kind of internal experience, if any, will AIs have? And secondly, what kind of effects will AIs have on the world, right? They could change the world. They could even replace us, conceivably, either without having any consciousness or without having any consciousness that we can understand by analogy to our own case.
Could they?
Well, if you're just asking what kind of effect, something will have on the world right now, this is an empirical question. This is a question about predicting what will happen, right? And you could postulate an entity that is smarter than us, that is motivated to, control the world, that basically thinks of us the same way that we think of orangutans or something like that. And
battery chickens,
and that would seem frightening. And the question as to, does it have an internal experience of consciousness comparable to ours? That doesn't even necessarily arise in predicting what it's going to do or not do.
And I would say the question of what consciousness is and how it works is the most important philosophical question at all. So I don't really understand, Grunish, how you cannot be curious about this question.
Of course I'm curious about it. We don't want that. I'm just saying to separate the questions.
Okay, hold on. So there's obviously a lot going on. It's great to have this kind of thing. And it's not that I'm not curious, just to be very clear, but my question here is about actually like materially, what do we like, what does an AI catastrophe look like? Because there's a difference between, is this thing feeling stuff? Are we going to hurt it? Which was your point, Eliezer, right? Like, is this thing conscious? Will we be causing it harm? Wouldn't you want that to be, wouldn't you want that to be extended to you? That's one question. But it seems that most people's concern is, how is this thing going to hurt me? And that's like an elephant could squash me to death and not know that I existed. What difference does it make if it has consciousness or not? Or is it because we're worried that this thing might actually understand what we have done and how we live and pass judgment on us and then choose to squash us?
Neither of those things.
Okay.
It knows you're there, but it doesn't care. It's not that it hates you. It's that it wants its own thing and you're in the way. It knows perfectly well that you're there. It knows that you're conscious. It doesn't care about whether or not you're conscious. And so that's how it ends up stepping on it. Because most things that an entity can care about are not you, humans, not even consciousness. They could care about tiny little spirals. They could care about tiny little rhombuses. They could care about enormous complicated clocks. They could care about chocolate chip cookies. They can care, though that one's pretty unlikely, but so are giant mechanical clocks. And they could care about many, many combinations and lots of these things. But the most ways you could randomly describe a computational predicate for valuing something, it's not going to have sentient beings having fun, living happily forever, ever after as its optimum. Now, this isn't to say that AIs necessarily, that all possible computer-based minds necessarily don't care about us. It's my prediction for what happens when people build them at their present level of competence, having no idea what they're doing. They end up someplace random in the space. If you end up someplace random in the space, it doesn't care about us very much. Not literally random, but random from our perspective, we can't predict it.
Right, okay.
So that a thing that is smart enough to kill you knows that you're there. The concern is that it doesn't care. Not that it cares about the same things you do and passes judgment on you for not separating your recycling, but that it doesn't care whether or not you separated your recycling and steps on you even though you did separate your recycling.
Liv, I mean, you were sort of saying that you were concerned about the way AI is going as well. So what does this AI catastrophe look like to you?
I mean, that's one direction. There's other ones such as, well, I mean, again, throughout history, yes, we are in unprecedented territory, so maybe history doesn't apply. But at the same time, if we look back at history, whenever a more powerful and more intelligent group comes across a less powerful or intelligent group, typically it didn't work out well for the less intelligent group, whether it was Homo sapiens coming along and Neanderthals meeting the Homo sapiens, or whether it was Native Americans when they encountered the first Europeans. Didn't work out too well for them either. Now, maybe AI is going to have a higher morality than us and doesn't care to do that, or maybe it manages to unlock abundance and not go and not need to smush us because we're not in the way. Maybe, but there's no guarantee of that. All we can do is look at history and go, well, that didn't work out so well. So again, like I'm not saying I know how a catastrophe could play out. I'm not saying I know that it definitely does. I think there's a chance that it can go well. My main point is that the way that we are going about it right now, where it's just about go as fast as possible, optimize for like short-term metrics like maximizing shareholder value or getting the biggest hype, who's got the biggest funding round and so on, is not the best way of ensuring that these really high stakes questions are answered the right way, or at least this really high stakes shift, this leveling up of essentially creating this new techno species, because it's not clear. Like some people think it's purely a new technology or purely a new tool. I think that's probably in a minority in this group, although I don't want to speak for the others. Increasing numbers of people think it's some kind of new species, but even the word species is hard to apply because it's got this like biological lilt to it that it's something so unbelievably new, we just can't possibly predict where it's going to go. But as Eliezer pointed out, the way we're going about it, of all the possible things it could end up optimizing for, it's this massive search space. The number of things where it's actually good for us, or at least where it can safely coexist with us, compared to all the ways it can safely not coexist with us, is much smaller. So I don't know how it's going to turn out. I just know that the current way we're going about it is horribly suboptimal.
Okay. But then, let's imagine for a moment, it's a tool, right? Currently, it's a technology. As far as we know, it's not actually sentient, conscious. I mean, we don't know, right? So far, I'm loving these really awkward faces that everyone is pulling, but we've not seen any signs of it. Let's just take it at face value. Right now, we have these computer spreadsheets that seem to talk to us the way we like to be spoken to. You can tell I'm not a computational scientist or anything like that, but these things exist, right?
Have you used these systems yourself?
Yes,
like
of course.
GPT-4? Okay, just checking.
Yes, of course I have. Of course I have. I fall into the millennial category of always being polite to ChatGPT because you never know if it becomes. I don't want it to think I don't have manners. And I was aware of that as I was using it for the first time. And it's clearly such a thing that Instagram feeds me memes about how that's the case.
We are pointing at a very important point, Ganesh, I think. And this is the present systems that we're looking at are not in the category of the systems that Ganesh and Eliezer Eliezer are worried about when they talk about AI systems developing agency and displacing us. The systems that we currently have are very different. And while OpenAI and Anthropic and others are making very big bets on the idea that these systems can be scaled to the point where they become superhumanly intelligent, they're not. At the moment, when you would take a system like Claude, which is a very capable LLM, and you ask it about physics, it's not going to be nearly as good as Scott. And if you ask it about decision theory, it's not going to be nearly as good as Eliezer. Right, it's the systems are not very good at making out of distribution predictions. They're not very good at creatively developing new thoughts, making new reasoning, testing their ideas with themselves, learning from what they have done so far. And while a lot of people are working on this, we don't yet know how well the present approach scales. And maybe the secret is not in trying to imitate across many, many people, so you get to slightly superhuman performance in many, many human dimensions. And basically approximate it, and some point suddenly some kind of breakthrough happens. Maybe the way is different. Maybe we need to get to systems that are able to reflect on their ideas, and they need to reflect on how to get better, that learn how to learn, that develop themselves in very much the same way as we do. To me, an AI catastrophe looks slightly different. To me, it means AI is not being built before humanity burns itself out. I suspect that this technological society that we are in is by itself not sustainable. We are not able to keep it stable. We are not able to survive within life on Earth if we continue with the present tools that we have. And I think we need better tools to understand reality in ourselves. And to me, the big catastrophe is if we don't achieve to build those tools. And we have not a big history of making things better when we do them slower. Typically, when we make them slower, the California train is not going to be better than the trains in China just because we build them slow. I'm also very wary of arguments that are being made against technological systems that would prevent from the internet to emerge. Right? Most of the arguments that are being made to AI are things that apply even much, much more to the internet itself. All the dangers that it has with dissemination of harmful information and so on. But all this is dwarfed by the fact that, by the benefits that the internet gives us. Imagine we should shut it down. What would happen to us? And it's not just because we became dependent on this dangerous, evil technology.
I don't remember anybody saying that the internet was going to be smarter than us and then wipe out humanity. Like maybe somebody somewhere on Earth managed to say that, but if so, they were being silly. The internet is not that kind of technology. The argument against AI is not that it's going to spread misinformation, it's that it's going to kill everyone. There is a difference.
Well,
I wouldn't say that it's silly. The notion that
these are both arguments. These are both arguments that are made by different sets of people.
Well, yeah, so I mean, on one hand, we hear that, you know, this thing could kill all of us. On the other hand, we hear that our lives depend on it. So let's take a few moments here to actually talk about whether or not AI could actually improve our human experience and if there are actually any potential benefits. I mean, is the only reason why there's technology being developed right now so that companies can sell things better to us because they want to have these personalized mimics that will be tailored to encourage my consumption of things? I mean, surely there must be other things that it's good for.
I mean, there are massive and obvious potential benefits. I mean, you know, any kid can now, you know, use GPT to tutor them in any subject. You know, my daughter has used it to great effect. It seems very predictable at this point that the way that we will interact with our computers in a few years will be, you know, the Star Trek way that, you know, you just can tell it in English what you want it to do, and it does that thing, right? You know, that's sort of, but, you know, as predictable as it was in, say, 1993, that yes, you know, the way that we interact with each other will be via this World Wide Web, right? It just, it simply hadn't happened yet. Right. But I think with existing LLMs, if you just interface them with all of our other tools well enough, then that could be done. I mean, drug discovery, I mean, AlphaFold is already, you know, is starting to revolutionize, you know, the way that biochemistry happens. Right. So, I mean, I think the benefits on the table are massive and obvious. You know, the question is whether we can get those benefits while avoiding catastrophes.
What surprises me is that, like, so many of these benefits that you've described don't require AGI specifically. They're like just really, really powerful narrow AIs. And I am fully supportive of those. I mean, it's fantastic, provided, again, we think about potential externalities. You know, often when you unlock the ability to do drug discovery, you unlock the ability to create horrible, novel chemicals that can just hurt humans, as we've already seen, like that they just stuck a minus sign in front of it and developed 40,000 new scary chemicals that were like, oh shit. So the bigger question as well is like, are we already happy with the way our current system is set up? Because you could argue that, as you pointed out, Joscha, like that we've got so many highly complex problems that are careening us towards the cliff really fast. You know, we are extracting from our from our environment faster than it can replenish. We're very much in this like open loop style economy. If we are just developing, if we've made a way to make AI suitably generalizable that every existing company can incorporate it to speed up what they're already doing, well, now we're just speeding up the train that was already careening off the tracks. So it sounds like you're hoping for a new form of sort of like collective wisdom or something to emerge through AI that will like find better ways of realigning, you know, changing the direction of the track to something that is more sustainable and like doesn't just fall off the cliff. Is that correct?
I think it's very much a possibility. It's not a certainty. Also, not so much an AI optimist or a catastrophist. I'm more an expectationalist. I think that AGI will happen at some point. It's quite unavoidable, and we will need to prepare for being able to coexist with it. And we should, if we build it, try to build it as well as we can.
Okay,
And if we are preventing most responsible people from building AGI, it just means that the responsible people will stop building AGI.
Okay,
it will not mean that AGI will not be built.
Somebody needs to, hold on, sorry. Somebody needs to actually define what an AGI is and how it's different to the things that we're talking about right now.
Artificial general intelligence. It's able to learn and therefore do a very broad variety of tasks, much the way that humans are the most versatile animals on the face of the earth. A bee builds beehives, a beaver builds dams. A human will look at both of those and envision a giant dam with a honeycomb structure. We learn many, many different domains. We do that much faster than animals evolve slightly different brains that can shift from halves to dams. So that's the uniquely human capability that lets us walk on the moon despite having never evolved to breathe vacuum. And an AI that ends up with the same thing as an artificial general intelligence. And the big thing about LLMs from the science perspective is that they seem to, although not be as broadly applicable as humans, they're trained using this one scheme. Then instead of being specialized to dozens and dozens of different tasks, they seem to display some ability to pick up a wide variety, although not a humanly wide variety, of different tasks after they were trained.
Let me offer a very short definition. It's basically a system that is in those areas where it's mathematically possible to make useful models. It can make those models. And in a very narrow sense, it's a system that's better than humans at AI research, because that's the point at where we can do the rest of whatever that is. And we can go to the beach.
So, I think that's an attempted definition of artificial superintelligence rather than artificial general intelligence.
Well, it is a generality.
I mean, by some reasonable sounding definitions of AGI, the current language models would already be AGIs. On the other hand, we can point to things that they can't do, such as, find a proof of the Riemann hypothesis, or of a great
or answer a number of simple word problems that have been phrased in a slightly tricky way. Yes, or for that matter, like do correct algebra derivations. I recently asked ChatGPT-4 to solve a physics problem, and it just straightforwardly screwed up the algebra because, as we all know, AIs are bad at math.
But the reason why I asked this is because of Liv's point, right? You sort of said, well, when I said, are there any potential benefits? Everyone was like, well, of course there are. And then Liv, you were saying something along the lines of, at least what I heard was that, well, certain specific AIs for specific tasks can be really helpful potentially, could be potentially helpful. We already have some of them, and no one can deny that they've definitely advanced us. It was this AGI thing that was the thing that was of concern, which is why I asked for those definitions. So, we're here to talk about what artificial intelligence might do to humanity, humankind. And, as we're approaching the end of our time, I think that's an important nuance that you're pointing out. It's to do with the form of artificial intelligence seems to be different depending on what it's doing and what kinds of tasks that it's capable of doing, which presumably is to do with how we set them up. And there's some forms that we're scared of, basically, right? We're saying they could kill us, and some that we're not scared of. And so I guess most people who will be listening or thinking about the AI debate who aren't specialists are trying to make an assessment of, is AI something worth being scared of, or is it something that brings enough positives potentially into our lives to entertain it enough to enter that gray area? So I would say we're probably in the gray area already. And the question I put before you therefore is, are we happy to remain in the gray area to tackle these questions of consciousness, where our boundaries lie, what do we think, reflect on our past? Or is this a situation where we feel we should retreat immediately, conceding or potential benefits? Or is it actually worth facing those risks?
There's a big spectrum of opinions. We're probably not able to resolve this completely. There are people like Eliezer who think we should definitely retreat because it's too dangerous to step into this territory. And there are a number of other people who think this is nonsense. We will be able to control these technologies because they develop relatively slowly, and we are able to keep track of what we are doing. We have big progress in mechanistic interpretability. We understand what these systems are doing better and better and can control how they are deployed. And we don't know what's true in this space. We have to deal with this uncertainty and possibilities.
They can't know what's true because that implies that you don't pass any regulations and they get to go on doing whatever they want. The answer, we can't possibly tell if this is dangerous or not. is one that has been floated many past times in history with respect to endeavors that in retrospect should have been shut down. Notably like cigarettes and if you're familiar with the history of like bad statistics being used to show that you couldn't prove that cigarettes were causing lung cancer. The answer that the claim that you can't know something is also, very politically questionable. My claim is not that like the potential benefits are small or that the potential dangers are very large. It's that we're on course to not get the benefits and get the catastrophe. We're on course to screw it up at the moment. That's the case for backing off, not the possibility.
Yes, but you're making an out of distribution generalization that is not backed up by empirical evidence so far. And while you can be correct, it's not sound first principles reasoning that has no alternatives. And basically your reasoning is flawed by the fact that you do not consider any alternatives to your particular reasoning anymore. And I think this is a limitation.
Liv, what about you?
So, I mean, I don't describe myself as either a catastrophist or a pure optimist. I think it really depends how we go about this. I do think that the current incentive structures are not sufficiently aligned with the long-term flourishing, because as I described in my opening pitch, markets don't perfectly select for human well-being. They select for creating as much appearance of human well-being such that they can sell their product. And because that is the current dominating method of developing this, whereas this technology gets more powerful, that slight decoupling is going to become exaggerated. And there's only so much variance we can take. Is my concern. So that's one thing. My other concern is more this thing that I floated to Joscha, which is like, if our general economic system is already so misaligned, and we are busy piling on AI to speed up that system in every single realm, well, that's only going to surely exaggerate the misalignment. So what I'm hoping for, the thing that I'm like praying for, I spend my life thinking about coordination problems. I hope that proper, like really advanced AI is a thing that helps us solve coordination problems, finds ways to like better align incentives. So that's what I'm like really bullish on. And I want to see more of that. Essentially more like, I don't know, like wisdom, wise AI, whatever that looks like, is what we should be like really putting more effort into. And I see very few people doing that. There's like, I don't know, there's a couple of companies that are thinking about it, but a lot of them are just like, how do we ride the hype chain? Because it's not even necessarily their fault. They're just in such a rat race. There's such few, there's a really scarce resource, which is like intellectual capital and also VC funds to an extent, although that seems to be increasingly less scarce. They're in this rat race of who can outcompete the other and make each other dance. And that means that these important like reverence questions and like questions of like, how do we actually go about this with wisdom are going by the wayside. So that's my concern.
The case for catastrophe is not tied to some like narrow theory of exactly how minds work. It's that ignorance is not your friend. It's that not knowing which lottery numbers are drawn does not mean that you get to win the lottery. When you have one or many, slowly or quickly, when you have super intelligent systems around, things that are smarter than you, if we have screwed up our entry into that, we do not get to go back and try again because they don't let us. There's a sense in which you've got to get it right on the first really serious try, and to get the first time it really matters, and to get anything right when you have not tested it under similar circumstances before is a really, really difficult ask in any field of engineering, let alone one based on rather murky science where many of the fundamental principles are not understood. The current systems are behaving in ways that seem cute and fun, and because they don't actually have the capability to hurt anyone, but when they do misbehave like that, it's not that anyone can go into the system and figure out what happened and will it happen again. The malfunctions seem so fun and harmless because we have no idea what underlies them. It's like trying to put together a nuclear power plant or a nuclear weapon while having no concept of nuclear physics. Of course, the first time it gets large enough, it's going to melt down. They're going in blind, and even if they weren't going in blind, it would still be a very difficult ask to the first time we get lots of systems around that are superintelligence that could take us out, that therefore for the first time have a motive to try to take us out, to have them not take us out, to steer the outcome. We are not on course to get the benefits. We are on course to get the catastrophe. That is the case for backing off.
Scott.
I think that it is like overdetermined at this point that AI sort of will be centrally involved in everything that humans do in this century. And am I worried about a catastrophe destroying human civilization? Well, of course I'm worried about that. I was worried about that before recent advances in AI, and putting those things together. Now, should I be worried about a catastrophe for civilization in which AI is centrally involved? Well, you may notice that I have now committed myself to yes. But then there's a crucial further question of what do we do about that now, right? Given the immensity of the uncertainties, right? I mean, Eliezer has been talking about, a sort of a random choice from the space of possible minds. I don't know how to think about that, right? He has a strong intuition that like a randomly chosen mind would be optimizing some goal that is very far from anything that we want. Is that true? I don't know. It might be. I think that certainly something that we can do now is we can look at the powerful AIs that actually exist and that are being developed. We can look at what harms they are causing, or how bad actors are misusing them to cause harm, and we can try to mitigate those harms, and we can hopefully learn something from that experience, right? I've been working at OpenAI on how do we recognize text that came from language models as opposed to text written by humans. That can be used for lots of categories of misuse, not just students cheating on their homework. Okay, we can try to advance interpretability, meaning understanding what is going on inside these models. But one thing that's become very, very clear to me, and for example, from the drama at OpenAI, this past November about the board and Sam Altman, is that if there is going to be a pause or a slowdown, the kind of thing that Eliezer has been calling for, it is not going to happen based on someone just having bad vibes, or someone making an abstract argument that they don't like the direction that things are going in. It is going to have to be in response to, well, either some smaller scale catastrophe, a Chernobyl, a Titanic sinking, a thing that or hopefully, rather than reaching that point, it is, there is some experiment in a closed environment that gets done that shows everyone, here is what the danger is. You see what could now happen. And so I've become more and more convinced of the sort of central importance of, getting clear warning shots. You could call it, gain of function research, or getting clear assessments of what these systems can do before they're deployed. Because I think that if there were to be a pause, that would be absolutely necessary to coordinating everyone around it.
As a
Perfect.
voter, I don't think you
you
wait
so much,
for
Eliezer. I'm really, really sorry. I have to call time on this. As ever, there's never enough time, and I want to thank you all for taking part in the last hour and 2 minutes, because I did let Scott run. Thank you again to all four of you for a very lively debate. I can see that this is not a simple subject, and one that has a lot of potential, but also a lot of considerations. And I hope that we continue to have people like yourselves to ensure that we as humans stay within the rails and help actually achieve our own potentials going forward.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a really sad clap because I'm the only one with a mic on for you all.